How do we break out of our processes? How do we move faster? Perfect is the enemy of done. I can see issues where something is going out in a business unit, let's say the C-suite or leadership teams or those that are kind of coming to the center of the organization even understand it. It's out the door. I mean, do you think that's a danger of things that can happen in that way?
One of the biggest risks of decentralization is fragmentation and messaging. You have separate business units telling their own story in their own style and tone, and then your company narrative looks like a patchwork quilt.
Hello and welcome to Building Brand Gravity. I'm Anne Green.
And I'm Steve Halsey.
And we're glad to be back together again. Steve, you and I were just together in Raleigh recently. I still see you're still in our office there. I'm back in New York, but it's nice to be back together on the pod.
Yep, it's exciting to be coming to our listeners from multiple GNS locations. And Raleigh is certainly a very dynamic city, and we've seen the area we're at. When we were first here, none of this was behind me. So it's been an exciting development to see all the growth and the investment here in the Southeast. And, you know, with everything going on in the research triangle here, it's also a really good market for some of the challenges that you're going to be talking about in your podcast today, with all the investment and the highly regulated industries, with just the role of comms.
Yeah, you know, I'm glad for that setup. Thank you. I had a good conversation with our guest today, who I'll bring in a minute. And it had to do with a really perennial issue in our industry, which is where is comms sitting in an organization, and how is it structured? And related to that, where is its stature and influence? So more specifically, for the conversation that's coming, it was precipitated by observations of where the pendulum swings from either centralized function or decentralized function. And we particularly saw some interesting articles about Pfizer recently, which is obviously a big player in the pharmaceutical space that has decided to, you know, say goodbye to a long time really respected comms leader. I mean, to say really respected is an understatement, and move more of the comms structure into a decentralized function. So they're embedded within business units and not so much within a central service comms structure, if I'm understanding it correctly. And it's not something we haven't seen before. It is like that pendulum swing back and forth. And it's always interesting because it raises a lot of questions for our industry about how should comms be structured in given sectors or organizations, and what are the implications of one model versus another?
Yeah, and I think what you hear is a lot of that. Hey, we want customer centricity. Let's be really close to the customer, what that looks like. And at least from my perspective, we're seeing a lot of momentum now about decentralization, because it feels like agility, right? If we're closer, if we're in the market, we can be more agile. But without the alignment back to the mothership, so to speak, it quickly becomes noise. You know, and when you become in a trust fragile world like we're at right now, every word carries a lot of consequences. So from my perspective, the tension really becomes clear that if you've got agility without alignment, you're really risking that trust. But alignment without agility risks relevance. So how do you find that middle ground? I think it's like all things that you say, yes, and, right? That's kind of the challenge that we're facing right now.
I love that phrase. You hit me with that the other day about, you know, those two sides of the coin, because I always joke the grass is green and brown on both sides of the fence, right? With my guest today, it was really about this question of, it's a very intense risk environment right now, and things move extremely quickly. I think this individual feels that danger and wanted to have that discussion about what are the risks and the danger of making it too decentralized. Is that in some ways you're more agile to the business units and to that customer base, but the agility to the reputational aspects of the corporation as a whole, how quickly are you seeing issues rising up out in the different pieces? Is there enough agility, speed, nimbleness of a team to understand how you respond? Is there enough cohesion in what that corporate message should be? And not just a crisis comms response, but really any kind of communications response. So I think there's a lot of tensions in there.
There are. And one of the other things I think is important to keep central to it as well. And we talked about it on an earlier Brand Gravity episode with Elliot Mizrahi and Robbie Ekelek. Elliot, as most of our listener knows, is with the Page Society, and Rob is with Harris Poll. And they were really talking about what they called the confidence curve. Public trust is very uneven. And when you lay generational aspects across it, it adds another dimension to this conversation that there's a lot of skepticism across some generations about leaders' intentions, and it's only growing. And that makes a structural misalignment that a company may have even riskier. So, like you said, it's really about that balancing act that leaders face. And I thought that's what's so exciting about the conversation that you're about to have with Chrissy Jones, is that's exactly what she challenges us to think about.
Absolutely. And Chrissy, she has a long career in communications, really senior counsel and practitioner, has been in a number of industry sectors, including the pharma sector. And I think it's time to bring her in. So please stay tuned for this conversation with Chrissy Jones. Well, I'm very excited to be joined today by Chrissy Jones. Hi, Chrissy. How are you?
Hi, Anne. I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Just to let our listeners know, I've got my notes right here. Chrissy is a very seasoned communications leader, more than 15 years of experience in shaping reputation, advising executives. I know you do a lot of executive thought leadership and guiding organizations through complex moment of change. And she's led strategy for major product launches, thought leadership programs in industry peers in the public sphere. And I love this one piece of your bio. Chrissy is especially known for her ability to make it make sense, taking those complex issues from science to strategy. I know you've worked in healthcare, pharma, professional services, into clear narratives, and making it make sense, I think, is a part of what we're talking about today. But did I miss anything in your bio you think people should know?
Isn't that at the heart of what communicators do? We make it make sense. No, thank you for the intro. No, I think that you just about covered it.
That's great. One thing I always like to ask, especially because we've got a wide range of listeners, a lot of them are across sort of integrated marketing communications, but beyond too. I'm sure some friends and family as well. How did you first come to communications? I always like to get personal to start. It's not always the most obvious field, especially how we move through it. Where did you get your start in the field?
Yeah, I think probably like most communicators, my path has not been linear. What I am passionate about, what I was passionate about at my start was writing and reading. So I was an English major in college, and I just wanted to figure out a way to monetize the ability to write and read all day long. And so for me, I've been in the industry in corporate comms for almost 20 years. What I have done that has been consistent across that time period is really helping leaders and organizations achieve clarity through very complex issues and initiatives. So sometimes that has been strategy, sometimes that's been in the science industry. Often that has been with very sensitive issues. But I think that, that through line of my career has been connecting those dots so that people can see the bigger picture. And so that leaders can act with confidence and clarity.
And that I love that, and I think that sense of what it means to communicate, to write, to connect with others is so at the heart of it. Still, no matter where we're positioned in this world. I've been agency side. You've been what is considered more client side. So, we've seen so much change in the field. Me 30 years, you almost 20 years. What are the things that still excite you about it today? It is a lot of change all the time, but there's also some DNA to it too.
Yes. So yeah, I have been in-house or client side my whole career. What I really love about communications is that it's the intersection of art and business strategy. So you really get to use both sides of the brain, translating that complex business strategy into those human terms that really help people relate to the organization and help build the corporate reputation. So that's kind of the heartbeat of the company, is that reputation. And like you just said, the field has evolved tremendously. I think that 20, 30 years ago, we were very tactically focused, press releases and media pitches. And now we are really a driver of trust and influence. So I think the pace is just getting faster and faster over time with AI, digital. Um, so for me, it's really the challenge of marrying the speed and the substance and building lasting credibility with our storytelling.
Yeah, I like that speed and substance and also the art and science of it too, and the connection. Uh, and it is amazing to see the change and then ask ourselves what stays the same. Because in some ways, it's the humans at the center. It's communicating between humans across groups and the ways in which communication lands or it doesn't, multi-stakeholder environment, which I know you're very much used to. I mean, this to me gets to the heart of what I hope to talk to you about today and why I reached out to you. I really enjoy in real life connection, and we've had some of that, which is great through industry bodies. But I also enjoy the connections that we forge online, especially on platforms like LinkedIn. I do try to spend some time there to see what are people talking about. And I always pay attention when there's moments of sort of lightning on LinkedIn or where moments that really light people up and it seems like there's something that is exciting them or they feel really passionately about. People are sharing a real point of view. And what I was excited about is I saw one of those moments that you sparked in a LinkedIn post that you shared. And the essence of it really had to do with this question of the communications function, which, by the way, is not just PR means press release anymore. Yay. Hopefully people have a deeper understanding. But this question of how is it organized? And form follows function and form are very related. So this idea of is it centralized, is it decentralized, and what are the tensions there? So maybe catch our listeners up a little bit about the issue that you saw and what you posted, and then we'll get into it more.
Okay, so what I saw was an announcement of a major shift in comm structure at a very large, very well-known, reputable organization. The reaction from industry peers and functional peers was very centered on the leader, which was absolutely deserved. The accolades are well deserved. But I was struck by how little attention was being put on the structural changes themselves. So structures send signals. And then this move from a centralized communication structure to decentralized is a signal or a statement of how the company values communications as a strategic function. So what I sought to do was to spark a conversation about that, because that's not just isolated to one company. That has ripple effects across our function or industry.
Yeah, and in this case, it was Sally Sussman departing, a major pharma player. She's so well known and so respected, and as you said, deserves all the flowers, has been such an incredible leader in the sector, an incredible leader for the comms function, carried companies through some major reputational changes, ups and downs. And so this question of that visibility. But I was struck, as you comment on this, and like you said, that's one data point, but it's really the bigger picture, right? This is happening not just in one sector. You see this kind of pendulum swing, the pull back and forth, centralized, decentralized, not just for comms, but it seems to have been, I've noticed this over the years with communications in particular, having worked in so many sectors. But I was noticing the same thing, Chrissy, when I saw your post on LinkedIn. I was like, yes, why is people not, why are we not talking about this? Like, where is that discussion? Why do you feel that larger backdrop was less acknowledged or discussed in the public sphere? I'm just curious if you have any hypotheses on that.
I mean, it's hard to say for sure. I think part of it is that people naturally gravitate towards the human story. Sally's legacy was the headline and is so, especially for those of us in comms, especially for those of us in pharma comms. I mean, it's the celebration is so well deserved. So I think that's maybe why the conversation centered there, rather than with the organizational structure part of the conversation. But I wanted to make sure that structural shift wasn't overshadowed by some of the conversation that was happening, because the structure really matters. It signals to uh, not just comms professionals, but the wider industry, how an organization values communications and whether it sees comms as central to enterprise strategy, or if it sees comms as more as an embedded set of support functions. I think those types of changes are not necessarily celebratory or personal, so that could be why folks we're not speaking about them as much. But the reality is that they are quite consequential for the future of our function, and also for corporate reputation and reputation management for organizations.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the implications for reputation and the risk factors involved, because you've talked about this both in your LinkedIn post and also in a article that you did for a trade magazine that I thought, deepened the discussion. That was really excellent, and we can put a link to it in our show notes. I encourage people to check it out. But this, I want to come back to that. But first and foremost, you're right. Not everybody is really cognizant of the ins and outs of corporate structure. It's not something people study every day. I happen, as an organizational leader and a practitioner, to be interested in these things. But maybe give folks a sense, if they're not really familiar with this, what would be the difference between a communications function, and we're talking tend to be large entities, right? That's not small entities. It's often large, often multinational. What would it look like to have a centralized comms structure, communications function, whatever its name is, versus a more decentralized structure? What would that look like so people can paint a picture in their minds?
Simply, it's a centralized comm structure is one communications team that drives strategy across the enterprise, strategy and messaging across the enterprise. Decentralized, you'll have communications folks embedded in different business units, and there'll be less or no central oversight. So each of those models, you can dial up and dial down, so it'll look different for every organization, but each of those models separately has their own merits. Centralized communications builds consistency. You have a strong enterprise voice. Decentralized communications, you have more agility. You have comms folks that have deep knowledge in different areas of the business. The issue, or the tension, is that decentralized model comes with risks. And one of those risks is trading coherence and alignment on messaging for speed and agility.
Yeah, it's such an interesting balance. Like you said, there are, gosh, I feel like we can't ever get away from the word hybrid. It's like our lives now. Everything is about hybrid still. But there are structures, obviously, where you have the hub and spoke. You've got the centralized model, and ideally, maybe that's an ideal thing, where then you reach out into business units so you can build that rapport and that affinity and that subject matter expertise. And I was saying to Chrissy, when you and I were preparing for this, I've seen this sort of tension, like, let's say in an agency context with earned media relations teams. You have this pull back and forth between, we need a centralized earned media team because they will own higher level relationships. They will build those skill sets. You'll naturally attract that publicist person who's different. But then you worry, do they lack the subject matter expertise of the client sectors, right? And so then it pulls back to the account teams. But I think what you're saying about this moment in time, like you talked about this in your LinkedIn post and in your article about the specific dangers and how the risk landscape changes around decentralization when you come into different sort of moments of time. What about the landscape today? And especially in highly regulated industries, pharma is one of them. What about that landscape makes you feel like that risk profile is a bit higher now for decentralized comms teams?
Yeah, in any highly regulated industry, you're protecting brand reputation, but you're also protecting regulatory credibility. So inconsistencies that could possibly occur with a decentralized model can create confusion for regulators and the public. And then once that trust is lost or eroded, it's very hard to rebuild. So that's why I really value that connected, centralized model and think it really matters a lot in regulated sectors.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you play it out, that agility and the speed. This isn't. I'm all about the idea of dynamic tensions. Like I'm not a either or person. I'm often both and. Like two, three, five things can be true at one time. I think if you can't think in that way, it's hard to be a leader in today's context. It's so much happening, but we want flexibility, nimbleness, agility. I mean, we're talking about that in my organization. How do we break out of our processes? How do we move faster? Perfect is the enemy of done. But I can see issues where something is going out in a business unit, and before, let's say, the C suite or leadership teams or those that are kind of coming to the center of the organization even understand it, it's out the door. I mean, do you think that's a danger of things that can happen in that way?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest risks of decentralization is fragmentation and messaging.
Yeah.
So you have separate business units telling their own story in their own style and tone, and then your company narrative looks like a patchwork quilt.
Yeah.
Um, the other risk is duplication.
Mm.
So having teams reinventing the wheel because they're not connected, and kind of wasting resources in that way. And then related is governance. So if you don't have that center, you could end up with rogue messaging, campaigns that aren't aligned to the corporate strategy or the enterprise strategy. So while decentralization offers a lot of agility and deep subject matter knowledge, um, there are risks, right? So what what we would love to see, I think, what communicators would love to see is if we're seeing trend towards slight decentralization, we want to see that connective tissue continuing to exist or being built in organizations that have a decentralized structure, so that your voice isn't splintered.
Yeah, and it's so funny. I feel like since the advent of social media, this is just one example. When left to its own devices, it being any organization, right? All of its component parts will gravitate toward we need our own channel. We need our own social channel. We need this. Like I've had so many situations over the years where clients or, organizations or peers were dealing with trying to reel people back in because there's channel proliferation and confusion. And I have to say, this whole dialogue around AI, um, which is more than one acronym can encompass, by the way. I have a pet peeve about people saying AI as if it explains everything. But if we talk about generative, we talk about the large language models, and we talk about the revolution that's happening in search, zero-click search environment, generative engine optimization, the role of authority, how discovery is changing. There's so much. In fact, there's new research from Muckrack, the communications platform vendor out there that we'll be reporting on in another Building Brand Gravity episode. That's did a really deep dive analysis in how AI discovery is being generated. The large language models are getting better at recency, meaning they're pulling in stuff into those AI summaries that are quite recent, which was not the case before. So boy, you could see how that fragmentation would be a real mess in terms of how AI is representing your organization, right?
Absolutely. And I think that it's very exciting that you're doing a podcast on this, and all communicators really should listen to it because we are going on a journey to educate our organizations about these changes. Whereas marketing had traditionally been sitting in the seat, or marcoms had been sitting in the seat of, um, feeding the SEO engine, we are seeing a shift now where traditional communications work is going to be feeding the Gen AI engine. So we need to educate, our stakeholders internally about these changes and what an important role communications is going to play.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's an exciting moment, but it's a moment to kind of re-knit together how digital marketing, marcoms, communications, stakeholder relations, how it comes together in a more intentional way. Not that SEO goes away, but AIO, GEO, whatever we want to call it, this is requiring a thoughtfulness regarding content strategy, earned, owned, the peso model, all the stuff that we've been talking about for years. It really is that next step change. And I think that theme of where, whether it's more centralized or less centralized, how do you avoid fragmentation and the risk that comes with that? I mean, there's a larger question to me, because I think you were so right on about the reputational risk issues. Things move so fast. And if you think about, say, a pharmaceutical context, but it could be anyone in healthcare, and you think about, let's say, Wall Street as a stakeholder, right? Because most of these are publicly traded or larger entities out there, large health systems, whatever. What is it that this entity is specializing in? Where are the horses they're really riding? Where is that center of gravity that's been identified by the leadership team? Is there so much fragmentation because every part of the organization wants to feel like their stuff is the most important, that the story becomes so all over the place? And that's why I really appreciated you pointing out sort of the risk of fragmentation. But I think there's a backdrop here, which is, what is the relative stature and empowerment of different functions within an organization, and including different leaders? So the C-suite, which may encompass a chief communications officer, not the same in every organization, doesn't report the same, isn't quite the same. But what is your sense of how that reflects back on where communication sits in organizations?
The the debate really never seems to go away for where communication sits in an organization. And maybe part of that is historical, looking back on communications really being a support function. And it's grown now into a strategic driver. So, finance and legal, you never see the same conversation happening for those functions. No one, I've never heard anyone ask if the CFO has earned their seat at the table, at the proverbial table. Um, so they've always been seen as indispensable. Comms is still fighting that battle in many organizations. One of the reasons is visibility, because good comms is invisible. Good comms looks seamless, which ironically makes it undervalued. And then when things go wrong, people notice. So leaders in communications are constantly needing to prove their worth in ways that CFOs and COOs often don't have to. Um, and and then there's the cultural component of it as well. So you have some CEOs who are really attuned to comms. They are storytellers. They value storytelling and reputation. And then you have some organizations where that is not the case. So comms will be relegated to being a tactical support function. But I think those inconsistencies are why this remains an open question, or why this remains a challenge for us in communications. But the last 5 or so years have been really critical for communications. And I think that what we've seen is, through the pandemic and social justice issues and political polarization, what we have seen is that reputation is strategic. And so the companies that get it right are going to outperform the ones that don't. And your communications team are your reputation drivers.
I think that's so powerfully said. It has been a heck of a few years showing, putting a spotlight on almost every type of stakeholder group, the pressures on those stakeholder groups. It reminds me of a related issue, which is this sort of strange bifurcation that would happen sometimes between internal and external communications. Like, that is a very old-fashioned way of thinking. I think most practitioners I know would agree, but it was so separated for so long. And the fact is, those employees and colleagues are the first, the drop falls in the pond, the first ring are your own people before it radiates out. And so I think breaking down those silos and recognizing the pressure on all those stakeholders groups, and the fact that reputation has significant impact. It's really like, what does reputation do? It's permission to operate. It's that trust and permission to operate. It could be literal permission through regulatory bodies, or it could be just permission through trust. So I think that's really powerful. You said something, that whole thing about earning a seat at the table. Well, comms has to earn its seat at the table. What do you make? That's such a common phrase we've heard over the years. What do you make of that? Like, I mean, just what does that bring to mind for you?
I'm tired of it.
Same.
I think it's outdated. I think it's frustrating. We are, as communicators, often positioned as less powerful or less impactful than some of our other supporting function or group function peer groups, despite the fact that an organization's reputation can swing markets. And we know that. Just as much as numbers on a spreadsheet, a social media post can tank your earnings. So I think the past couple of years, I hope, has really proven that comms not only deserves the seat at the table, but is an integral part of corporate strategy. I mean, we're responsible for trust, for leadership impact and executive visibility, and for organizational strategy. And those pillars really uphold the business.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. As we start to wrap up today, I'd love to think about, what advice we can give. Like, who are we? But let's give advice. We have experience. Let's do it. The first group I'd like to advise are those senior executives, like CEOs, that pick the sector. Again, decentralization or centralization of the function is happening in many places. It's a pendulum, I think, that swings back and forth. It's hitting pharma quite a bit right now, but it's happening elsewhere. For those that have that most senior level decision making, especially the CEO level, what would you advise them on? What kind of factors do you think that they should be weighing and even more educating themselves on as they as they weigh this question?
Yeah, I think to position this through the lens of, I think we're going to see more hybrid models. I think we'll see a centralized core of communicators for risk and issues management and maybe for business strategy, but we're going to see embedded comms through the business for agility and speed and depth of knowledge. So I would ask CEOs to not look at this as a binary, to look to design models that can do both, protect the enterprise voice and enable speed. So I think the question is not what works now or what's easiest to implement now, but the question that CEOs should ask themselves is, what structure is going to protect the company's reputation 5 years out? So that's more than just the org chart. That's more than just cost efficiencies. That's really a forward-looking, will this model provide us with a clear enterprise narrative? Will this model provide us with clear accountability? And does it allow us to manage risks across various stakeholders? I think, the CEO could look at communications sort of like an operating system. So you can have multiple apps running. So you can have multiple people embedded in these very specific areas, but you do need a cohesive, unified operating system at the top. So recognizing that the right reputation and the right structure is a strategic asset, and formatting the comm structure accordingly.
I love the idea of the operating system that has multiple apps running, multiple programs, but they come together as a whole. I think that's I haven't thought of it that way. I think that's a really powerful metaphor. I really like that. So turning to our peers out there across the industry, comms folks, and again, they can be integrated, marketing communications as well as comms. We're all doing many different channels and tactics, and the more symbiotic, the better, of understanding these levers. But for those that are either mid-career and really growing, or more senior folks, what thoughts can we share on the question of what to do relative to raising that stature of communications internally, or advocating, pushing for that more cohesive and connective structures that are better in this kind of volatile landscape? What would you say to our peers?
Yeah, thanks for asking this question, because I have gotten a lot of individuals have approached me and asked what they can do. And it really is very different depending on where you sit in the organization, the structure that's already in place in your organization, how large your organization is. There's so many factors that will impact and affect the way that you personally can advocate for change in your organization or advocate for the function. But I tried to distill it down to something that would be universal for all communicators. And so my advice is to make sure that you are not just running your silo. So build bridges and influence outside of your lane, because corporate reputation does not care about org charts. So we shouldn't either. What we need to do is connect across the business. And the more connected we are, the more bridges that we build, the harder it will be to sideline communications and to position us just as a tactical executor.
So much wisdom. I know you've had time to think about this as people have asked you, because that's hard. Like, it's amazing for people to come and ask that question. Corporate reputation does not care about org charts is one of the quotes of the podcast. I couldn't agree more. It's just like consumers encountering a brand don't care where they're encountering it. It's the brand. Like, we've known that in brand strategy for years. I absolutely love that. So to finish up, Chrissy, the name of our show is Building Brand Gravity. So I always like to ask people, what has you in its gravity right now? What is fun? What's lighting you up? What are you into? However you want to define that.
Okay, so I'm gonna try to bring this back to communications, but we're gonna we'll take 30. Last night I finally finished K-pop Demon Hunters. Have you
Oh my
heard
God,
about that?
so many people are talking about this. I was listening to another podcast when there. Oh, it was the New York Times was doing like a culture review. But yeah, tell me what your take is. What's your hot take?
People are talking about it. I have a 9-year-old daughter who is obsessed. So I finally finished watching it with her, and it's brilliant, because it's a masterclass in trend spotting. They have taken the appetite for K-pop, the appetite for anime, the appetite for what would you even call it? The zombie demons, the supernatural crime fighting, and somehow put it together into a package that works. And so I'd heard yesterday that this has now become, in just over 2 months, the most watched movie in Netflix history. The music is their earworms. The music is just stuck in my head now. But I think that if I'm trying to wrap it up and bring it back to communication, I think communicators can really take a lesson from this by embracing and aligning with the zeitgeist and the cultural currents, and seek out different ways that combine things that you didn't necessarily think would go together, but look out into the cultural current and see what you can pull and try to create something new.
I love that. And that's some great branding. Even the title captures your attention. You're like, what the heck is this? But when I heard the culture critics at the New York Times talking about it, one thing caught my attention, talk about marketing, is that the K-pop demon hunters, the women in the K-pop groups who fight demons, the demons who are guys, said to themselves, we have a marketing issue. We keep getting beaten by these singers. So maybe we'll form a pop group, and it'll be a demon pop group. So there's marketing for you, Chrissy. It's so funny. Well, I so appreciate you being on Building Brand Gravity. I encourage folks, if you enjoyed this conversation, check out our other episodes, share this one with your friends, especially in the comms field. A lot of really important things to talk about here. And Chrissy Jones, thank you again for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ann.